My name is Joshua Bixby. I'm the president and co-founder of Strangeloop. I'm here to talk about the marriage of CDN and FEO. I have a very ambitious agenda with 20 minutes, so I'm going to go quickly. The slides are going to be up. You can take a look at some of the detail. I want to take us through a case study so we can really feel what FEO is, and then I want to walk through how FEO has been weaving its way over the last 2 years into CDNs. So let's start. If you've lived under a rock for the last few years, you might not know what's on this slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but the reality is that your consumers, or if you are a consumer, spend more when sites are faster, then they're happier. There's a lot of insight, there's a lot of information, there are a lot of studies. If you are not aware of these studies, I'd recommend that you spend some time learning about it. We got this insight about 7 years ago when we were talking to our CTOs, and they told us that they had a secret for us, which was that if they made their sites faster, they could make more money, and that's why I founded a business to make sites faster. And what I want to do is I want to take you through, we don't have time today, all the history of speed and time saving, but there are 3 distinct phases that we've gone through. If you take a look at this chart, I like to fancy myself an amateur historian at speed. But you'll see, back in the early 90s, we would buy 1 server, then we'd buy 2, and we were forced to buy a load balancer. Then load balancer companies decided they need to make more money from us, so they started to put the features of servers into load balancers, SSL compression. And then the CDNs came out and convinced us to put our objects at the edge, and then transformation came out and convinced us that we needed to write better HTML, and that's difficult to do, and that's where automated solutions came in. Transformation has a very different basic assumption than the delivery notion. This is an example of a waterfall. If you're not familiar with waterfalls, you might be in the after 20 minutes here. But the notion of a waterfall is this is the perspective of the end user and all of the assets downloaded in order to render that page. You'll see on the left, this would be the origin. The middle would be if I added delivery. And for me, I've added compression. I've added basic small object delivery. You'll notice that the waterfall looks very similar. I've squished it from left to right, and I've made it faster. And then transformation comes in, or front-end optimization comes in, and what we are looking at is we're looking at fundamentally changing the waterfall. We take a different assumption. The assumption that what the server gives me I have to serve changes when we start looking at front-end optimization. We think we know better, and we are going to automate how sites deliver. We're going to have less requests. We're going to do them in a different order. And we're going to do that work for every individual browser. So there is a fundamental difference between the different architectures, or between the different technologies, and the layering of those technologies, and you can see that from a speed perspective. Now I want to take you through a case study. This is a bit of a cooking show. None of this is live. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start taking a bit of an anthropological view of a site. I'm going to take a site and I'm going to strip away every optimization that I can. Let's look at its performance, and then let's start layering on optimizations. Let's layer on what a traditional F5, Cisco, Citrix, Juniper device might do. Let's layer on what a CDN will do. Let's layer on front-end optimization. We'll take a look in this particular case about where the value comes. So if you strip away everything on this particular site, you see atrocious performance. Both first and repeat view performance. This site has 80 requests, is just over a meg, and comes down in 17/18 seconds. So let's start layering on technology. As we look at it, the waterfall is really ugly. There are a lot of requests, both first and repeat view. So the first thing I want to do is I want to layer on what a basic application delivery controller is going to get you. I'm going to layer on keep alives. I'm going to layer on compression. So I now have a load balancer application delivery controller. I'm going to turn on its myriad of features if I can figure out on how to do that. And my waterfall is going to change slightly. Hard to see here, but there is a dramatic performance difference. Compression helps. My site goes from about 18 seconds down to 10 or 11. That's the value that I'm going to get from my application delivery controller, the vast majority of those feature sets. The bytes have gone down. The time has dramatically gone down, mostly because of keep alives in this particular case. And my start render has also improved. We're going to spend time looking at start render and document complete, because those are the 2 numbers that are really important. Both have very important attributes. Both are very important when it comes to the end user. So now I want to implement a CDN. When I talk about implementing a CDN in this context, I'm talking about small object delivery. What I'm talking about is I want to really improve time to first byte. So now I'm going to layer in a CDN. I was at 18 seconds. I'm now down to 10. I'm now going to put the small objects closer to the end user, and I get a speed improvement. I'm going from about 10.5 seconds down to about 8.3. This is a test conducted from San Jose. Origin is in New York. So we're going across the country here. If I look at it, I have about a 50% saving on time to first byte because that's where the benefit comes. And I don't know if any of my videos are going to work because I had to migrate from a Mac to a PC about a minute ago. So you're not going to have all of the Pixar animation. But what that would have shown us is 17 seconds to 10 to 8. So you can just imagine that in your mind. We can do better, though. Now I've got a site, I've got my load balancer enabled with all of its features. I've layered in a basic CDN, and I still have too many round trips. I've got too many bytes, and my 2 timers that I care desperately about are way, way too high. And this is really what created the industry of front-end optimization, was looking at these results and saying, this isn't good enough. And the answer always was, well, you have to do this all yourself. Now it's your work. We've done everything we can. The bytes are as close as they can be. They're as small as they can be if I take the hypothesis that I can't change what the server sends. And an entire industry has grown to challenge that assumption. So now let's add in front-end optimization. Front-end optimization, for the purposes of this, we'll just think about it in buckets. I want to reduce the number of round trips. I want to change the order of rendering. I'm not particularly happy with how this page renders from an order perspective. It might be better if I move something up to the top or something down to the bottom. I want to do as much payload reduction as I can. I want to increase concurrency. So now, let's take a look at what this site will look like when I've layered in this layer of front-end optimization. Obviously, the number of requests are down, and we saw that from the earlier waterfall in a different example. When I take a look at the numbers, my bytes are down in this case as well, because I've been able to get a lot more out of things like changing images, maybe a different format, maybe the quality's too high. I've been able to get out inefficiencies from compression efficiencies from things like JavaScript and CSS. I've been able to reduce the time down to a more impressive 3.7, 3.8 seconds. And I've been able to improve start render by a dramatic amount. So what front-end optimization is, and the marriage of CDN is, again, all of these benefits are with the CDN. It's not on its own. We're not looking at front-end optimization without the CDN. Front-end optimization benefits and sits on top of the CDN to offer the types of benefits that we're talking about here. This was the clinching video where you would have said, wow, that's faster. Wow. Thank you. I appreciate that. I need as much help as I can get. Now, these aren't the only organization. This particular organization isn't the only one. There are a number of numbers, metrics, case studies presented by our industry that talk about the important things. And the important things are how it moves the business metrics. So Auto Anything is a classic case study, one of the first in front-end optimization, where they implemented front-end optimization. And we got a call from the CTO a couple weeks later saying, man, my conversion's up, my revenue's up, my cart size is up. You've changed my business. And I just, for a second, pause and think about the fact that that site is faster and consumers buy more. There's very powerful insight into that connection. That's really why we do what we do. Wine.com, this is an interesting example. This is one that layers on top of not only static object delivery, but also dynamic site acceleration. This is a customer of DSA. They also are seeing dramatic improvement. And we see this across the board. We'll end here with a slide that speaks to the vast adoption of front-end optimization, the number of top-end retailers that are looking to implement this technology. This isn't all about that. Once we realize that there's potential, once we realize sites can be made faster, we have to really talk about how we want to marry front-end optimization into the CDN. I have to digress, and I know I only have 20 minutes, but I have to digress into a bit of nuance. There are 2 schools of thought when it comes to front-end optimization. I'm not going to give you my own perspective on which school I think is better, but it was interesting for those who saw the transparent caching session. They also exhibited 2 schools of thought. One where front-end optimization can be done in real time, only in real time. So I see a page, and I've got milliseconds to make decisions about how to optimize that page. That's a real-time optimization. It's one page, one user, in the moment. There's another school of thought which looks at front-end optimization and takes real-time optimization and marries that with offline learning or advanced learning. two schools of thought, two different pioneers in terms of how these schools of thought are implemented. But when we look at where this integrates into the CDN, that nuance becomes important because where and how you integrate it depends on which school of thought you bring to the table. Again, I'm not here to discuss the merits of either. Recognize there are two. And when you as a CDN are thinking about integrating, or when you're a customer of a CDN and you want to understand how they integrate, which school of thought they come from, either advanced learning with offline processes, married with the real-time, or just real-time are important. So let's just follow a request for a dynamic object through a CDN. So browser's going to request it to the CDN edge. That CDN edge is going to route back to origin, because this is content, again, we're talking about dynamic content in this particular example. They might route back to origin through another CDN edge, or they might route directly back to origin. The content gets to origin. This page is dynamic. It has to be created from scratch. There are database calls. It is a dynamic object. It gets sent back to the CDN edge, either through another edge or directly, and on to the end user. So again, we're talking about that dynamic flow. In this case, we're focusing on HTML. Now, when I bring in front-end optimization, I have to decide where to bring it in when we speak specifically about integration points, where to bring it in. Traditionally, it's thought of as being brought in at the edge, and I hope that Pixar will work here. Yes, I should get a contract. It can also be implemented anywhere along. As long as it's in between one CDN edge and the other, FEO can work anywhere along that stream. I'm going, for the purposes of the example, to show it near the origin edge, but it certainly can be at either edge or somewhere in between. Now let's follow a request. So that request, one more thing, if you are going to have an offline analysis engine, you need to have something in your CDN which allows that to happen. So again, if you take the real-time only approach, this isn't necessary. If you take the enhanced real-time approach, you do need an analysis and control cloud in order to do that analysis. So here's the CDN. I've placed FEO somewhere in between the two. I've added an analysis engine if that's required based on the FEO technology I've picked. Let's follow the request. So now I'm going to go from the browser to the edge back to origin. It's now that HTML is dynamically streaming back through to the user that FEO takes place. This is where I'm rewriting that dynamic HTML. That dynamic content hits the FEO either somewhere in that path and is then optimized through to the edge FEO and onto the customer. So the optimization is happening in real time as that request is flowing through the CDN. Now, there are a few interesting areas of integration from a CDN perspective when we talk about marrying these two. So obviously, you have to become a believer that front-end optimization is real, that it's scalable, that it works. That's part one of the conversion. Part two of the conversion is you have to figure out how this fits into your world. So there are a few points of integration. Obviously, where front-end optimization, the software sits within the network is very important. Now, for the most part, front-end optimization, if you think about it from a CDN deployment perspective, is just the origin. So instead of telling the customer that the origin is the data center, the CDN just has to think of the origin as being front-end optimization, wherever that sits within that path. There are some really interesting integration opportunities there to actually leverage the geographical distribution of the CDN in order to make that efficiency between the CDN and front-end optimization more efficient. We've been doing that with a number of our CDN partners for over 2 years now. There's another very interesting area of integration which happens at the edge for the CDN. So one of the things that front-end optimization does is it does rewriting to play to the strengths of certain browsers and away from the weaknesses of other browsers. Imagine that creates HTML that might be different for different browser groups. Maybe IE6, I want to optimize in a certain way, and that might be different than how I optimize IE9. So when we talk about the integration with the CDN, some of the logic and the learning about how to optimize in terms of the marriage of these two technologies, you have to pay attention to that edge, the edge decisions. Imagine, for example, that the customer has chosen to cache their HTML at the edge. That CDN has to have knowledge about what to deliver. And there's a lot of integration capability there. There's also a lot of fruit in bringing some of that logic to the edge. We have a number of techniques where we are starting customers' experience, visual experience, before the server has delivered the page. And there's a lot of really interesting integration that happens at that point. And lastly, obviously, if you are going to choose the path where you have offline analysis to complement the real-time engine, there's a lot of integration there's a lot of really interesting integration capability, because the analysis cloud, and this now gives away my bias, provides deep benefit from a front-end optimization perspective. It lets us make sure the optimizations we're doing are safe. It lets us do much more advanced optimization. And actually leveraging the data that CDNs are feeding, we can even improve farther that, we can improve even more that optimization. So there's a lot of opportunity. So if you're thinking about front-end optimization and the marrying of these two technologies, we've got where the rewriting happens, we've got the edge, we have the analysis cloud, all areas where you should be paying attention to how this marriage works. Now, two other points when we talk about the marriage of CDN and FEO. One is measurement needs to be changed. So one thing that Tal mentioned in his presentation, and I don't like to yell at you, but your users are not at your CDN POPs. They're not on a fiber network in a tier 1 data center using a synthetic browser. They're real people. You need to measuring to the glass. So one of the things that changes as organizations move off of a traditional CDN approach and start thinking about front-end optimization is the Gomez Keynote Island, and I'm huge fans of Gomez and Keynote. But that island, you have to swim somewhere else. You have to swim to real end-user monitoring. You have to swim to synthetic testing that uses real browsers, real latencies, and real bandwidths. You have to swim off that island in order to show the benefit of this entire package. You also need to talk and focus a lot on mobile. So one of the great benefits of front-end optimization is I'm able to do things like round-trip reduction. Now, we see a lot of press about how CDNs are going to get into the cell towers. They're not there yet. And today, from my phone, I'm still potentially 200 milliseconds away from the closest edge, CDN edge. Round-trip reduction and other specific mobile techniques, like knowing whether a customer's on Wi-Fi or 3G, knowing what screen resolution they're on, knowing what their CPU power is so that I can make JavaScript decisions. All of these techniques allow us to finally have a real mobile story on the front-end side, or on the CDN side when these two technologies are married. The CDN technology today of I'm going to redirect is useful, but it certainly doesn't improve what is a dramatically growing and important target within our industry. So to end, I have a minute left. I just want to leave you on a slide which talks about the rapid adoption of this technology and see if there are any questions. Brilliant. Thank you very much.